Welcome to the Wise Fiduciary Podcast. I'm Marta Hurst. If you're a plan sponsor, committee member, advisor, or an executive responsible for a retirement plan, this show is for you. Season 5, we're doing something a little bit different. This season is about the fiduciary red line, the moment where it feels like you're doing the right thing, but you're not. It's where industry standard stops being safe and where a routine decision quietly becomes exposure. Each episode, we take one decision point and examine it closely, not from a sales perspective or marketing perspective, but from a fiduciary one, because most plan failures don't begin with bad intentions. They begin with comfort. Let's define the red line. Today, we're going to be talking about how much can you rely on your record keeper? Let's start with the basics. Record keepers provide specific services. Tracking participant balances, allocating contributions, processing loans and distributions, maintaining transaction history, producing statements, and storing records, hence record keeper. I once had an employer tell me they thought their record keeper ran the whole plan. And when I asked what they meant, they said, well, they have the website. That's where my participants go. And unfortunately, it's a pretty common misunderstanding about who is running the plan and who is responsible for the plan. So the website is a tool. The employer and the fiduciaries that they may hire to go along with it, they're the ones who run the plan. So do you know what your record keeper is actually contractually obligated to do? Over the last several years, maybe even 10 years, I think that record keepers have really started to fill in some gaps in a good way. So by providing participant notices, they might generate those, they might distribute those. Ultimately, there's a fiduciary obligation to ensure the accuracy and timely delivery of those notices. What happens if the notices aren't delivered? Do you know? Yes, I'm asking you, audience. Do you know for your own plan? Do you? What happens if those notices aren't delivered? Do you get a report? Are you supposed to send them out? Do they get mailed to the participant? How do you ensure? Because that is the fiduciary responsibility of the named fiduciary. So if you've hired us, we know what's going on. But if we are not, do you know what the drill is with your plan in those cases? Do you assume someone else took care of it? That's kind of where the danger zone comes in. Participant education. There are a lot of record keepers that now provide group meetings, videos, webinars. The content is generic and it is not customized necessarily to your plan design, and it is certainly not advice to your plan participants. They also provide tools and resources like calculators, retirement income projections, budgeting tools. Those kinds of things are often now found on the Record Keeper website. All great, excellent tools. I love that they are out there. None of those make the Record Keeper responsible for your participant outcomes. We brought on a new client recently who told us that they utilize the Record Keeper system to automatically push out some participant notices. This is a lot of them do that now, right? But then as we spoke to the Record Keeper, because one of our jobs when we bring out a plan is to make sure we know who all is doing what, it turns out the Record Keeper was not doing that. They could do that, but that particular service was not actually turned on. So the employer thought the Record Keeper was doing it, and the Record Keeper thought the employer had opted out. Ultimately, where's that liability lie is with the sponsor. They still have an obligation to make sure that all those things happen. So I think that's one little example of record keepers are providing additional support and help and tools. They are not taking responsibility for that from a fiduciary standpoint. Here's your red line. Service provider support is not fiduciary coverage. What does it mean to be a fiduciary? A fiduciary must act in the best interest of participants, follow the plan document, monitor providers, keep fees reasonable, and ensure compliance with ERISA. Record keepers do not take on those responsibilities and legal obligations unless they have explicitly stated that in writing. I have a note that says that that's rare. I haven't seen it yet. So I would love if you would tell me, hey, I found a record keeper that does that. Just let me know. But it has to be in writing. And I think there's a lot of assumptions that happen, again, as these record keepers are helping with tools and resources, but ultimately not taking the responsibility. I don't mean that as in, when your kid breaks something and they don't take responsibility for it. I mean, it really isn't their responsibility. They're just trying to provide services to help. Here's some record keeping language you might hear that sounds like fiduciary, but isn't. We'll flag potential issues. We hear that. That is helpful. We provide compliance support. Support is helpful. We send you reminders. Also true, helpful. None of those make the record keeper responsible if something goes wrong. And if the record keeper misses it, who is on the hook? The employer.
I'm on the hook for everything.
Where do record keepers stray? This is my cautionary tale. And I want to be clear, I like record keepers. They do an excellent job. And not all record keepers are created equal. I think it's just important to know that some of these things happen and to be aware. So one, and this is my personal pet peeve, record keepers weighing in on plan design. This, I feel like, was very predominant several years ago. I had a service provider who would come to our meetings and he would tell everybody, you should do auto enrollment. You should do auto enrollment. Okay. Auto enrollment before it was mandated, and maybe it'll be mandated for all of our plans soon, who knows? But that is a plan design decision that the plan sponsor needs to think about. How is this going to work for our culture? How is our administrative support HR team going to handle if things don't go wrong? Do we have the means to provide adequate communication around this? Does this help our plan, and in what ways? Because to me, when a record keeper or a non-fiduciary service provider is saying you should do automatic enrollment, that means to me they just want the assets to go up because then they make more money. Ta-da! Very self-serving comment. And not all of them are. And this was one particular person, I understand. But it is an example of where they might be weighing in, and maybe it's good for the plan, but it's very much good for them. So just be aware. Giving education that sounds like advice. This is a little tricky. It comes to your participant education. This fund is more appropriate for your age. Your risk score suggests this particular portfolio. That sometimes sounds more like advice than education. But the record keeper's job is just to provide education, not advice. But sometimes employers think that the record keeper then is responsible for the outcomes of that. They are not. Eligibility tracking. This also maybe is a pet peeve of mine. Record keepers have gotten into the eligibility tracking business, which can be so helpful and such a useful tool in theory. But they are technology, and they track hire dates, they track hours, they track entry dates. They can't interpret a plan document. Sometimes that causes issues that ultimately land back on the sponsor. So I have an example for you. We had a plan that came over, and some participants were missed in the eligibility tracking reporting because of the timing of the onboarding. So the record keeper executed their notices and reports based on the information that they had. But ultimately, that's the employer's responsibility. I have another plan. We constantly look at eligibility tracking. This HR professional is actually phenomenal, and she will send me a message and say, hey, we have this entry date coming up. Here's who I show is eligible. Here's who the service provider shows is eligible. And then we do, a little investigative work sometimes to figure out who is right. And we involve the professionals because that particular entity has a lot of rehires, and rehires, if any of you have them, they are very tricky and they have their own special rules. So eligibility tracking is not magic. It is a tool that is provided by record keepers. It is not a magic bullet. People still have to look at information and can't leave that all up to a non-fiduciary party. Incorrect notices. So I mentioned that record keepers now produce and send out notices, and that is great and helpful. I I feel like the fee disclosure notice, that's all their information. So they pretty much have to do it. Some of the record keepers now also produce like the QDIA notice or automatic enrollment notices. But the plan fiduciary is still responsible for ensuring that it is accurate. So if you have a QDIA notice, maybe you changed it with, like in a committee and made a change to that, but it didn't make its way to the record keeper. One, you probably have issues with where those funds are going. But two, your notice is going to be wrong. So somebody's got to have their eyes on that. So let's talk about support. That is what these record keepers are providing. Support is assistance without responsibility. And I don't mean like if the record keeper messes up, they could possibly say, okay, hey, this was our fault. Maybe because we entered the information wrong. Maybe because we forgot to ask for this. And they might, I'm not saying that they don't take responsibility for anything they do. I'm just saying that when it really comes down to a fiduciary liability standpoint, that's not on them. So that support looks like tools. It looks like templates, alerts, calculators, educational content, participant meetings sometimes, standard notices. Hey, if you give us this, we can distribute it. Support is very helpful, but if something is missed, that is still your problem, plan sponsor and or fiduciaries to retirement plans.
That's your problem.
Delegation is the actual legal transfer of responsibility. So this would be, for example, you have a provider who signs on as the 316 administrator, maybe a 338 investment manager, maybe a 402A fiduciary.
Hi, it's me.
Delegation means that they are legally accountable for whatever they are doing. So I mentioned 316 and 338. 316 has particular administrative things, which they outline in their contract that they are legally accountable for. Just because you have a 316 does not mean that now everything is magically being taken care of either. A lot of 316s are very specific about the things that they will do. 338 investment manager, they are legally responsible for the investments in the plan, what is being offered, when those are being changed out. Yes, you are delegating to them, but that doesn't mean that everything is suddenly being taken care of. But you've got a legal shield from those particular tasks that they take on. So here's some questions employers can ask. Which of these services carry fiduciary responsibility? And if you're talking to a record keeper, none of the services that they provide, I shouldn't say none, because again, maybe they've got a contract that says otherwise, but don't expect your record keeper to be providing services that carry fiduciary responsibility versus which are simply support. If you have a service provider who says, yes, I take fiduciary responsibility for these particular things, then your next line is, can you show me in the contract where you take on accountability? Because if it's not in the contract, it's not true.
Was it in the contract?
That's for any of your service providers, not just your record keeper. If anybody says that they are offering fiduciary services to your plan, it needs to say that in writing. I got to give you another example because that's my favorite. We recently had a client. We were reviewing 316 services offered through their record keeper. Now, this is an awkward conversation for me anyway, because we are providing many of the 316 services that they were offering, one of which was signing the 5500. So I am on this call with the record keeper and the client, and the record keeper is going through their 316 services and how helpful they are going to be. And when they got to the review of the Form 5500, and the signing, it very clearly said that the employer was still responsible for the review of the 5500. And then they would essentially tell the record keeper that it was okay to sign it, and then they would sign it. The whole point of having somebody sign off on your 5500 is because they're the expert and they reviewed it. So in this case, essentially, they would have just been paying for a signature. And fortunately, as a great client, we had a very candid conversation and they said, why would we do that? I don't know. Anyway, so know and understand what the service agreement says. Let's talk about consequences of relying too heavily on your record keeper. eligibility mistakes can compound for years. That participant that didn't ever get told that they were eligible to enroll, and now it's been 4 years, and they talked to their brother-in-law at Thanksgiving, and now they know that you missed them, and now you owe for missed contribution opportunity. Maybe notices don't get delivered correctly. And maybe I got into this tangent a little too early, but know what happens if those notices don't get delivered. So if your provider is only sending out electronic and they're not going to mail any out, okay, how do you know if there were any bounce backs? How do you know that those notices were successfully delivered, and when and what they were? Payroll feeds can go unchecked. Please, please, please tell me that as the employer, you are not just relying on your record keeper to make sure that those payroll, if you've got payroll integration, it's real nice, and some people just set it and forget it. But please tell me that you have accounting procedures in place within your firm to recognize when a contribution has been missed. We actually had a client a couple years ago who double funded a contribution. I'm not sure how it ended up uncaught as long as it did, but we did figure it out. And the employer was like kind of oblivious. It wasn't a small amount of money. And I'm like, hey, we think you made an extra contribution, but this, like, the reporting is kind of confusing. Can you verify? And they were like, no, that wasn't us. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it was. Can you check again? No, it wasn't us. Three times I had to point out, no, really, it's quite clear that this money is here. We are pretty sure it came from you. And then they said, oh yeah, it did. I just don't understand who's doing the books within the organization that you missed that kind of transaction. So please make sure not only are you not just relying on the record keeper, but you are also having some accountability on the back end of that and reconciling books. Okay. I'll get off my soapbox on that one. Distributions might get processed without proper review. I know some record keepers kind of have a process now or an order for like who reviews this and who touches it. Some of them now also have like kind of an auto go, where as long as everything looks good, it can go. But I think it's important that you still evaluate those sometimes. Don't just assume that everything's going great. Have some checks and balances in place. Ultimately, fiduciary exposure lands on the employer or the named fiduciary. To reiterate, record keepers support the plan. They don't protect it, at least not in terms of actual offset of liability. How should you think about the record keeper for retirement plans? Make sure you use them for what they're good at. Data, technology, website, transaction processing, scale, participant, tools. I say that kind of loosely. All of them are better at some things than others. But think about those things when it comes to record keeping services. And then balance that with fiduciary oversight and independent review. And then delegate where you need to, like 204 or 2A.
Subtle.
All right, so record keepers are vital. They keep the engine running, but they're not your TPA, they're not your fiduciary, they're not your safety net, unless you've explicitly hired them to do that. So here's your homework. I've decided I'm going to give homework on these episodes because you should have something to do after. I want you to pull out your service agreement and look for this language. The record keeper serves as a fiduciary of the plan. Or look anywhere in your document for fiduciary and see where that lands. If you can't find that sentence or a sentence like it, then you know exactly where those boundaries are, mostly what we've talked about today. And then ask yourself, are you counting on your record keeper for things that they never agreed to do? Do you understand the difference between support and fiduciary liability? And do you have the right partners in place to protect your plan? Because a good record keeper is important, but good oversight is essential. If today's episode raised questions about your plan, good. That's the point. Fiduciary responsibility is not about checking boxes. It's about understanding where the red line actually is. So if you want to continue the conversation, follow us on social media for ongoing insights and commentary. If you need clarity about your own plan decisions, schedule a time with our team at fiduciarywise.com/scheduling. And until next time, stay thoughtful, stay disciplined, and know where your red line is.